Hi everybody, Eve Harow on Rejuvenation for the Land of Israel Network. And I'm in the hospital, don't worry, I'm fine. I'm in Hadassah Ein Kerem, which is probably one of the premier hospitals in the world. We're here with someone who is doing research in this hospital. He actually works in Shaare Zedek, Dr. Asael Lubotzky, who published a book in 2008, which was just in Hebrew, which was just translated into English from the Wilderness in Lebanon, about his own personal journey. So first of all, thank you, Dr. Lubotzky, for making time in a very hectic schedule to sit with me.
You're very welcome, Eve. Thank you for coming here.
So as I was telling you when we were finding a quiet place to sit, you don't know, but you didn't know until about 5 minutes ago, that I visited you in the hospital, in Rambam Hospital, a little over 10 years ago, after the Second Lebanon War. And so maybe from this point, I'll let you tell our listeners what it was that you were doing there 10 years ago and where you've come from there.
Okay, so firstly, I want to thank you for coming to visit me. You with many of others in Israel. Thank you for that. Going back to more than 10 years ago, I served as an officer in the Golani Brigade. I was a platoon commander. And we started fighting in Gaza just after Gilad Shalit was captured. After a few weeks of fighting there, and some of my soldiers were even injured in one of the actions in Gaza, we heard about another thing that happened in the north, the capture of two another soldiers, Udi and Eldad, and we were sent to the north to start to fight there in Lebanon.
Now this is the summer of 2006, right? What's become known now as the Second Lebanese War.
Exactly. At that time we didn't know it's going to be the war, and I grew up on stories of war that years ago I didn't know that I'm going to be self-participating through war. So we were called to fight in the north and start to attack some villages in Lebanon. The first one that we had to attack was Binj Bel. Binj Bel is a pretty big village in southern Lebanon. It consists more than 12,000 of houses. And we got the mission, the Golani Brigade, together with the paratroopers and Brigade 7 from the tanks units, to start to attack Binj Bel. That was summer 2006. We entered in Binj Bel. Just after we entered, I heard in the radio that something is happening. Actually, some combat started in the entrance of Binj Bel. I came there to help and to kill some of the terrorists and try to evacuate some of my comrades from the tanks unit who were injured. This for me was the entrance to Lebanon, the entrance to the war. We got into Binj Bel, and after about 48 hours of fighting there, the mission was completed. We thought you have to get out. This was the original mission. But then we got new orders, on the opposite, not to get out, but to fight in a deeper place in the center of Binj Bel. We got the mission to catch some houses there in the middle of Binj Bel. Every company commander led his men into the houses. The last company who should have entered the houses was Company C. Just before dawn, Company C, led by Alon Hakima, entered their houses. Alon told Amichai Merchavia, the lead platoon commander, to enter the first house. Amichai led his men after him to enter the house. They were preparing to enter in, but there was a problem. They couldn't break through the door. They tried to break the door with some devices, but nothing helped. One of the other officers ran to bring some explosive kit to open the door, and while they were all waiting there, suddenly Amichai's gunner saw that someone is entering the yard, approaching the guys. This was a terrorist, a Hezbollah terrorist, and this gunner, Eviatar, opened on fire and killed this terrorist. This is how the Battle of Binj Bel started on Rosh Chodesh Av, 1st of Av, more than 10 years ago. The battle started at about 5 a.m. and lasted for more than 10 hours. My friends from my battalion fought like lions. Major Roy Klein entered the yard, tried to help Amichai to fight against the terrorists. He ordered Amichai and his men to climb on the wall there and try to strike the terrorists who were hiding behind the wall from the right side. Amichai and his men were running to the second yard after climbing the wall, and just when they came very close to the terrorists, they saw that actually the terrorists were hiding between a second wall, and the terrorists were in a higher place. They started to throw grenades and fire on Amichai's men. Amichai was severely injured. His men some of them were killed, some were injured, and they were all bleeding there in the middle of the yard. Major Roy Klein, our deputy battalion commander, threw some grenades over the second wall, and then climbed with his communication guys to the yard, trying to evacuate the soldiers from there. He ordered the guys to open a stretcher. They put Amichai on the stretcher, and 4 men, including Major Roy Klein, were holding the stretcher. And then, just before evacuating Amichai, who was in a severe condition, from this yard, suddenly a hand grenade was thrown into the middle of the yard. Maybe one of the terrorists who was injured came back to fight. Maybe another terrorist crawled there. But this hand grenade was thrown and fell just less than a yard from Major Roy Klein. Klein understood the consequences of this hand grenade. If it's going to explode in less than a second or two, most of the guys there probably will be either injured or killed. And Roy Klein, decided to do something almost never done before. He decided to jump on a grenade, sacrifice his own life in order to save his men. Klein jumped on the grenade exploded, he was explosion, but the only one who was injured was Major Klein himself. All these guys, all these men were saved because of his sacrifice to save his men. But I want to tell you also what did Roy Klein after the explosion. He was still alive for a short while, severely injured, and he understood that there was no chance he's going to survive. But I want to tell you what does a commander in the IDF, Major Roy Klein, in his last minutes. After the grenade exploded, he tried to talk in the radio, maybe like an instinct of a commander. No one heard him. We tried to hear him, but we couldn't hear him because his radio was exploded from the grenade. But one of my guys, Yochai, was teamed to Klein, heard him say, Klein met, Klein is dead. Actually telling the other commanders in the brigade, in our battalion, that he's going to have to be switched.
To take over for him.
Yeah, exactly. Telling the other guys that someone is going to have to take over his position. And right after talking in the radio, he took from his vest a special communication device that should not fall to the enemy's hands. He took it out, gave it to one of the other commanders, and then cried the O Shema, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad, and fell there dead in the middle of Binj Bel.
The story that you just told of Roy Klein, as someone who was there, has really entered. I don't know if there's an Israeli who doesn't know the story of Roy Klein. The story, especially given how many Jews died saying Shema Yisrael when we weren't able to defend ourselves. And so to have someone like Roy Klein who saved his soldiers and saved many people in Israel, because ultimately we are able to win or at least push back Hezbollah in the war, I think is burned into the brain of every single one of us. That prayer, that statement of faith like no other. The same prayer that the famous Rabbi Akiva says 2,000 years ago when the Romans are murdering him because he dared to teach Torah and dared to want a free and sovereign Jewish state in the land of Israel. So what Roy Klein did, and what all our soldiers potentially and should never have to do, is in a line of great people, and that we all understand what the bigger picture of what we're doing here in Israel for fighting for the freedom to be Jews and to be free in our own ancient homeland. You were there in the battle. You also have a twin brother. Was he fighting as well in Lebanon?
So I was fighting in the same area. I didn't see myself this event, but I came over on and took a charge of evacuating some of my injured soldiers, and also Roy Klein himself. My twin brother was also an officer in the army. He was in the Kfir brigade, He was in the Bik'ah with his soldiers who were trainees and leading more trained soldiers to go up to the north. Nowadays, as a father, I think about my parents having both of their sons, twin brothers, one in the north fighting, one other in the Bik'ah. We don't have so much connection, don't understand exactly who is fighting where. I think it's very, very courteous from my parents sending us both to the army to become warriors. But that's I think the way of proving that we are fighting for our country. We are we are actually making a success of what many, many generations were promised and prayed for, and our generations are making it through. So that's part of being here in Israel.
So if you already mentioned your parents, your father specifically has fought Israel's battles in different forum. He was a member of Knesset for a few years. Yes, Dr. Alex Lubotzky, tell us a little bit about him and maybe how it's very different sitting in the Knesset and having to pass the laws and actually having children who are out there and fighting for the country. How was it growing up in a house like that with someone who was so involved in caring so much about Israel?
So when I was a child, I remember when my father came to the Knesset, became a member of Knesset. Actually, most of his life he was in the academics. Yeah, I'm a math professor in the Hebrew University. I do remember those years when he was in politics, that instead of having your father coming every day in the afternoon and no much phone calls, of course you're very involved, so you get many, many phone calls, but you also feel the passion to do things for our country, for our Israel. And to tell you the truth, I think it started generations before. My grandfather, my father's father, grew up in Vilnius in the Second World War. And he, after the Germans took over Vilnius, he became a participant in the underground. Later on, he moved onto the forest with Abba Kovner. They were 150 guys, or maybe less, that went out from the pipes of the ghetto to the forest. He became a partisan, fighting for our nation. I think that those years of fighting for our nation as a partisan and later on as an officer in the Irgun, the Etzel, led also my father and maybe also myself and my siblings to know that in order to be here, in order to be involved in the Jewish life, sometimes you have to fight, sometimes you have to be involved in politics or in other interference, but you have to be involved. You can't just stay in your own place.
A lot of people say somebody needs to do this, this, and this. And here in Israel, we're the somebodies. That's it. We're the ones who have to do it. It's a tremendous privilege, but it can also come with a price. And you yourself paid a high physical, personal price for your involvement in the Second Lebanon War. So, and that's, I think, is that what inspired you to write the book? So perhaps tell my listeners the continuation of the story of the war.
So going back to Lebanon, after the Battle of Bin Jbel, in this battle we lost 8 of our comrades, 8 casualties. Each one is Olam Umlo'o, a whole world. Of course, when you lose 8 of your friends, it's very, very difficult. But after finishing this mission and evacuating all the wounded and dead bodies from Bin Jbel, we were called again to fight in Lebanon for a few more weeks. And exactly 2 weeks later, on 2 B'Av, 15 of Av, 10 years ago, we came in again into Bin Jbel in a line of 8 vehicles. I was third in line. And about after 2 kilometers in Lebanon, I heard in the radio that the officer who leads the row wasn't sure about the right path, how to enter Bin Jbel. I wanted to help him. I decided to open my cabin, actually take my upper body out of the armored vehicle. This way I could see very well all the area, but of course I was exposed. Every sniper or any light armor that will fall around could hit me. And I said a few words in the radio, but just then I saw something from the distance, about a kilometer north from our position, something that looked to me like a huge flashlight, and then a ball of fire approaching us. This anti-tank missile hit directly my armored vehicle, penetrated the armor. I will never forget the huge explosion and then I felt like something burning me from the lower body to the upper body. I felt everything burning. I yelled in the radio, but no one heard me in the radio. At the time, I was with my upper body out of the vehicle. If I was sitting, I would probably have been injured in my chest or head. Probably wouldn't have been here sitting with you now, Eve. Mm-hmm. I felt the injuries in my legs. I felt burnings. I tried to call on the radio. No one heard me, to no avail. So I yelled to my soldiers in my vehicle if they can function. Both my soldiers there, my driver, Ohad, and both my soldiers, my driver, Ori, and my gunner, Ohad, were functioning. I ordered my gunner to fire back. He was firing, and Ori, the driver, tried to stop the vehicle. The vehicle was on fire. The other guys from my company started to evacuate us from the vehicle, while the other guys from the tanks units were fighting back and firing on the terrorists who were firing on us. More anti-tank missiles and gunners were firing on the whole area. They took me out on a stretcher because I couldn't walk on my legs. I remember that when one of my friends, Hikam, another platoon commander, yelled to us what happened, I yelled to him back that we are hit by anti-tank missile. Ori and the Ohad are okay. I didn't know that they were also injured, but I said I need a stretcher. I knew I couldn't walk on my legs. They bought a stretcher, they put me on a stretcher, and I ordered one of my guys to be like the commander to lead our mission because I was the officer and I was injured. They took me downhill from this area. And just when going downhill, I suddenly felt a severe pain in my right leg, just below the knee. I couldn't see well because I had many burns also in my eyes, but I do remember that I saw my right leg actually falling apart from my body from the stretcher. It was only attached with some soft tissues. I yelled to one of my guys to take the rotten leg, put it back on the stretcher and tie it back, but at the time I was sure I lost my right leg, hoping that my left leg will survive. They took me down to some tank there. There I got first medical treatment. They put 2 tourniquets in my thighs, and I was evacuated with the tank to the border. A helicopter who came to evacuate me couldn't land in the battlefield because of the fire there, so I was transferred by a tank to the border, and only then I was put into the helicopter with both of my soldiers. And I was really relaxed to see that they are both with me, injured but not in severe condition. And I remember that just when the helicopter took off, I knew I'm starting a new battle, a new war. Not a war that you fight with the enemies and use weapon and strike and fire back, but a different war. The war of rehabilitation. A war who started more than 10 years ago. A Sisyphic war, a daily Sisyphic war. A war for walking back. The war of rehabilitation, the war of getting back to normal life. This war is mainly personal. You have to overcome many, many difficulties on a daily basis. In the beginning, in the hospitals, in the operation rooms, and overcoming so many operations and medications, and you have to overcome everything and go back to life. But the war continues on a daily basis because even today, more than 10 years ago, I still have my scars. I walk with crutches. I have to cope with many, many difficulties that are physically in my body since my injury more than 10 years ago in Lebanon.
What were the extent of your injuries? That you lost your right leg below the knee?
So eventually, even though I had a severe injury in my right leg, also my left leg, but especially my right leg, there was a great doctor in Rambam Hospital, Dr. Alex Lerner, who decided, even though there were low chances to rescue my right leg, to try to rescue the leg. And he started to do many, many surgeries in my right leg with some special metals and other devices. It's called the Elizarov technique. Eventually on, I had to have a surgery with a free flap, taking a muscle from my back and actually transplanting it into my right leg, like high technology, high medical technology. And then after it was emerged into my leg, I had to have another operation of lengthening my right leg with some screws and metals every 6 hours to turn 8 screws in my leg in order to lengthen the bone till it's going to be in the same length of the left one. So I have both of my legs. My right leg is only partly functional. I don't have any sensitivity below my right knee. I can't feel my leg, I can't move the leg there. It's hard to function with it, but I have like special devices in my leg, in my shoe that I can use with, along with 2 crutches, so I can handle it. I also have many other shrapnels and burns in many parts of my body. But I function. That's, I think, the most.
Well, you more than function, because I'm sitting here and interviewing you in medical school, and you are way beyond that. You've already become a physician. Did you always want to be a doctor, or it is part of your rehabilitation, as part of the tremendous respect that I see you have for the medical team that literally put you back together again and on your feet again? Did that inspire you to go into the medical profession, or that was a dream that you had even before the injury?
Well, I was inspired during those months in the rehab center, starting in Rambam and then in Tel HaShomer, and I saw so many medical staff, my physicians, my nurses, my physical therapists, and more, so many people who tried to help my condition and help me to become better in so many ways. And after spending so many months and having more than 15 surgeries, I decided myself to enter this magnificent world of healing people, of becoming part of the medical team. And I decided to start to study here at the Hebrew University in Yerushalayim. And my dream and my prayer today is that my own experience as a patient will help me nowadays as a physician, when I treat my patients, to know a little bit more about their pain, the things that they have to cope with. And I hope and pray that when I treat my patients, I look in their eyes and see the pain, I see the difficulties. And of course, every disease and every medical issue is different. But I think there's something in common, saying to myself, we're in the same boat. We're all in the same boat. We're all human beings. We all have things to overcome. We all suffer from different issues. And I feel more attached. And especially today when I work as a physician in a pediatric ward, when I enter the room, I see the glance, I see the smiles of the kids entering this doctor who enters with crutches and goes with and sits, and I think that maybe it's an icebreaker. I don't have to bring magics and things and clown and stuff. I come in and I have my icebreaker, 2 crutches, and my smile, and I feel that many times it helps me to understand better my patients, their families, and to speak in the same level, not the doctor and nurse who stands in one side and the patient and his family, but not with so much discrimination, but we are all in the same boat, as we said. We are all in the same place, and this way I hope that I can treat my patients, not only professionally, but also, when it's part of it, with humanity and empathy to their situations.
I would say, especially for children who perhaps can't find the words to express themselves, which is the difficulty with treating, right, pediatrics, is what you said, that when they see you, there's this sense of he gets it before they even say anything. Just to go back to Lebanon just for 1 second, do you, especially because your father was very involved in politics, and the Second Lebanon War turned out to be a very political war in the sense of there was a lot of anger, there still is a lot of anger in the Israeli public about this war, about the way it was run, about perhaps some of the ideas or motivations of the political echelon at the time, especially when it comes to the Battle of Ben Jbil and the tremendous losses we had there. Because you were in that battle, because you come from a home that also perhaps knows a little bit of behind the scenes of what goes on in politics, do you have any anger towards what happened there? Any idea that it maybe could or should have done differently? And then even if you do, excuse me for laying question on question, has that affected you? Is that where you're coming from, or that's something that you've left behind and it's not going to change anyway? Like you have, perhaps differently than other soldiers that were there, a particular because of where you come from, maybe a particular look at what happened. And you lost a lot of friends there. How do you look back on those 10 years? How do you see that?
When I look back at the Second Lebanon War, though it was a controversial war and there were so many papers after it in the newspapers, how things should have become and have done better. So firstly, I personally didn't come out of the war with anger. I think that one of the feelings that I share with many of my guys, we fought there in Lebanon. We didn't have any news papers in Lebanon. We didn't know what's going on in the media. And we felt that, I would say, in the majority, and maybe in almost all of the battles that we fought in, we felt that we are winning. Though we lost many of our comrades, even in Bin Jbel, we killed more than 40 terrorists. I'm not just saying a number. Where later on, we took out the bodies of the Hezbollah terrorists in order to take them for giving them back later on for some negotiations. So we won those battles specifically in the tactic level. When we came out, and again I say that I shared with some of my colleagues and some of my friends, we kind of heard that even though we feel that we won those battles specifically, we are losing in the...
The fact is that 10 years later, still the biggest threat, even with Gaza and everything else that's going on in the Middle East, and I know this from my son who's now serving in the army, but it's not a secret. What's considered still the biggest threat on our borders, and again, leaving Iran and all that aside, is Lebanon and the Hezbollah, which is maybe even more entrenched in southern Lebanon than it was 10 years ago.
So going back to that, we felt that in a strategic level, maybe we were losing some of it. So first I will divide between what we felt, as a platoon, company commanders, maybe even battalion commanders. We fought in Lebanon, we are feeling that we are winning in a tactic level. When you try to ask the question about a level of the state, of a nation, so of course there are many other issues that you have to consider. I mean, of course, when you say Israel is fighting against terrorists, so the Hezbollah terrorists are not, of course, they don't have the high-tech and modern army that we have. So of course we had to have better results. But I didn't come from the war with anger. I came with the passion that we are fighting for our nation. And I thought also personally that I didn't take it, as maybe I didn't think about it as a decision, but it emerged later on that I'm not taking it personally. Meaning that even though I paid a high price, the bereaved families paid a much higher price. Of course, we can't even compare. But personally, I don't take it as a personal issue. I mean, I'm not angry on the people who are then leading our nation. I'm not, because I was injured there. I mean, I have my critics as a citizen, but not as a war injured, saying that, okay, I was injured then I'm angrier more and take it more personally. And I didn't become involved in those issues because I felt it's not going to be also right from my rehabilitation point. I know that there are many also other issues in this, not only how to lead the army in the strategic issues, but also if there was the right way, more like in the moral issues, and there are many other issues involved in it. And there are also many questions about the military issues, if we have some more concern about the Iranic level and the Hezbollah with Syria. But that, I would say, in my opinion, is not better than any other one. I mean, I don't feel that because I was fighting there and injured there makes my opinion more justified, more right, more clever. So I take it like in different issues. One is my issue fighting there, and I felt it was a right war. We were fighting for our nation. That's correct and that's good, and we did what we can there. And as I said, we also felt that we are winning specifically the battles that we were participating in the tactic level. The different issue is like more the issues of a nation, of the Israeli state. And I have my critics. I'm not sure this is the right place to say them, but I'm not concerned because I feel that the army learned so much from this war. And they had better performance in the later on rounds in Gaza. And I know from my friends who came back to service, who became officers, nowadays majors and captains, and more than that, that the army is all the time learning from mistakes, doing more and more training, and I trust my army, I trust our nation, we are going better.
What my listeners can't see is that you're wearing kippah on your head, and I assume that you associate yourself with a traditional religious lifestyle. Your injury, your rehabilitation, serving in, the Jewish army, did that affect your faith? Did your faith help get you through it? Are you a different person now with regards to the Creator than you were 10 years ago?
I would say that, of course, my beliefs and my thoughts were affected by the war, by fighting, and also by my personal injury. In some ways, I think that my general thoughts and my faith wasn't changed in the theological issues. I mean, I probably would say similar things, but it's different to quote what says the Kuzari or the Rambam on some issues than to live it yourself or be in those situations. So I'm in the same, let's say, like in the same ציונות דתית, same cultural...
right, like the religious Zionist world. Yeah.
I stayed in the same society, in the same area, but I think in many, many ways, I think that I maybe told my pupils in Bnei Akiva, in the youth movement, or maybe later on in the yeshiva when I studied in Ma'ale Adumim, I would say similar things, but from a different perspective. After you fight for your life and for your nation, after you sacrifice and physically and also lose friends, after you spend months and years in the hospitals, the praying is different. The way you look about things is, I would say, more deeper, more realistic. My beliefs became a lot more from the soul, and not only in the logical, theological issues, but more like deep in the soul, in the feelings.
You said you're a father. You have how old are your children? You have 1, 2?
I have 3 kids. My oldest Neta is 6 years. Just started first grade. My second child, Nave Amichai, was born exactly in the same date I was injured, 6 years later, in Tu B'Av. I remember that when my wife gave birth, of course we were really, really pleased to see a baby, and then we saw, of course, the date, my injury date. And we called him Nave Amichai. Nave is one of the names of the temple. Amichai, Am Yisrael Chai, after my close friend Amichai Merchavia, who was killed in Bin Jbel. And nowadays I really think that when I hear the name Amichai, Nave Amichai, in my home, in the garden, not only in the cemeteries and in Yom HaZikaron, but I think that Amichai, as his name says, Am Yisrael Chai, it's a living name, a growing son that becomes more and more active, and this is the way to remember with a smile my close friend Amichai Merchavia. And my little one, Yuval Iser, his middle name is after my grandfather, my hero partisan grandfather, who fought against the Nazis and the Germans and became an officer in the Irgun, also served in the Golani Brigade in the War of Independence, and he passed away about 7 years ago, and we called after him my youngest, Yuval Iser.
So you're raising a house of children who are incorporating the past and the experiences that you've had and the people that you've known and loved, and the future. And here in Israel, do they ask you about like why you're on crutches? Do they see that you walk maybe not as quickly as some of the other fathers? What do you say to them?
Well, in many, many ways they ask it. It's different when they are babies. I have many stories, like when my youngest one wants me to get out to the garden or go out somewhere. He just calls, give me my crutches, and I understand the message. Abba, let's go. So he doesn't speak. So this is his way, is a verbal way to explain that. My elders, Neta and Nave Amichai, they ask many questions about it. My daughter Neta, she can explain to anyone what is war, what is Golani, when I was injured, what happened. And my son, he's a guy, he's a boy, so he really says that my father was in war, he was fighting, and he killed the enemies, the Ara'im, the bad ones. He really is proud about that. Many times we have like small stories about it. Whenever I come home, I don't surprise anyone, they can hear me. So they ran to the garden to see when I come. Sometimes when one of the neighbors who had some cane would go through close to our house, my kids run out looking for me because they know the noise of the cane coming. They think it's my kratzes. One of the times my kids explained the teacher in the kindergarten that he's not grown up enough. He doesn't have yet kratzes, something like this. They know that their father has kratzes. I mean, many cases they understand it. They live with it. Of course, sometimes they ask me, can you take me under soldiers? Can you run with me? And they know I can, so they understand it more and more. But I think in many ways, because I feel I have a healthy life. I mean, I don't consider myself as disabled or handicapped. I mean, of course, I have physical injuries, but my life is healthy. I have my dear wife Avital, and we have 3 kids, and I work, and we have a healthy life. So my kids, they grow up into it, and sometimes kids, though they ask questions in a way, another way they also accept some of the facts in life because they grow up into it. That's life. Don't ask how the car moves. The car just moves. So the father has kratzes. It's a fact of life. My father used to say that someone doesn't see well, he wears glasses. Someone who can't walk well uses kratzes. It's not the exact compartment. Of course, there's some difficulties and changes between those issues. But in a way, it's more like what is in your mind, what do you do in your life, not what you hold in your hands, but more what you do in your life. So I feel that we have a healthy life. I grow my children in a happy manner, and I'm okay with that.
When people say that you're a hero, how do you respond?
I don't feel I'm a hero. I had the privilege to fight with heroes. I fought shoulder to shoulder with great heroes like Amichai Merchavia and Roy Klein, and I feel that part of my mission in this life is to tell their stories. This is one of the reasons that I wanted to write the story, to make people know in our country and in the Jewish nation about those heroes, especially about the story of Roy Klein and others. But I don't consider myself as a hero. I had the privilege to be there to fight for our country. I believe that any other guy in my situation would act pretty much similar, as many soldiers and commanders in the IDF do it for decades. And our nation has thousands of years of fighting for our nation, for the Jewish nation. People do it every time, and I became one of those who have to continue this tradition, unfortunately, to fight for us. But I think we are in such a different condition that we are in 70 years earlier, that it's really privileged to be part of the Israeli state, to fight for our nation, when we have the ability and we have the power, with God's help, of course, to fight for ourselves. That's a thing that for 1,000 years people prayed. And we really have, I think, a great time in the history, a great nation that can really make those dreams come true.
For those of you who've listened to me for a long time and still don't get it, Dr. Asael Lubotzky is one example of many of why I live in this country, because I'm just surrounded by the most unbelievable people all the time. And so my prayer for my grandchildren now, for my son, for my grandchildren, and for your children, is that one day those spears will be turned into plowshares. And as much of a privilege as it is to be able to fight for our independence here, that one day we won't have to anymore, and we'll just be able to do what it is that we do, which is make the world a better place and not have to justify it all the time and stand up against people who, for reasons of their own, don't want us to be here. So thank you so much, Dr. Asael Lubotzky, for all that you have done for all of us, for all that you will continue to do to heal the children of Israel in what I hope and what I'm sure will be a long and illustrious career. And as for your book, where is it available? From the Wilderness and Lebanon, if people listening to the interview and want to read the book more in depth, where can they get it?
So as far as I know, it's from Koren and Toby Publishers, so it's available, of course, in Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and in Israel here in Stimatsky, Tzomet Sfarim, and in the website of Koren Publishers. I spoke about my grandfather, Asael Lubotzky, who was a hero partisan fighting against the Germans in the 1940s in the Second World War. I want to maybe conclude with one special story about it. In one of the battles there against the Germans there, my grandfather, Asael Lubotzky, was injured from a bullet in his right leg, the same leg that I was also severely injured 60 years later. He was carried out from this battlefield by his fellow partisans. They took him to the camp, but in the medical conditions of 1943 in the forest, of course, the injury became more and more severe. The injury became infected. The wound became infected, and he was in a severe condition. Actually, his partisans, his friends, even dig a hole there to bury them in there. But there was a partisan nurse in the camp who decided to do everything to save my grandfather's life. She treated him with some leaves. He didn't have any bandages, and they even caught some antibiotics, Prontozil antibiotics from the Germans, and they gave it to him, and the infection became better, and my grandfather became well. Eventually on, they both survived the Holocaust. They made an aliyah, immigrated to Israel, and had their families, and she passed away, I think, about 20 years ago. 60 years later, after my grandfather's injury, I was injured in Lebanon, and I was hospitalized in the Shiba Tel HaShomer Hospital, in the rehab center. And one of the days, my grandfather came to visit me. It was back then, in about 83, 84. He wanted to see me and to visit me in my room. Sitting there in my room was besides him and my family, my grandmother and other family members, and also some of the medical team, including Dr. Zivner, the head of the Orthopedic Rehabilitation Center. Sitting there, my grandfather told his own story about how he was injured. So that I knew very well. As a teenager, I heard this story many, many times. But I didn't know one fact. When my grandfather finished the story, he told us, "You know who was this nurse who saved my life?" And then he looked Dr. Zivner's eyes and said, "Your mother, Anka, was the nurse who saved my life." So the nurse who saved my grandfather's life in 1943 in the forest of Lithuania, 60 years later, her son, Dr. Zivner, was the orthopedic surgeon treating my legs here in Israel. I think maybe this tells the story of our nation, from the Holocaust, from maybe the worst era of our nation, to the era of the Israeli state, to our nation today.
And also a story of, in some other place, I don't know where it is, there's some kind of closure, there's some kind of many, many years later, when someone does a kindness or more than a kindness for someone else, you don't know in your own life. Like, we need to be kind, we need to be good people. We're not always going to get thanked, or we're not even going to know right away that we affected someone. But somewhere down the line, we will get paid back. And that happened in your family, and I think that's a beautiful lesson for all of us. What a lovely story. Thank you so much, and thank you again, Ben, and Tabitha, and everybody at the Land of Israel Network. Eve Harow, Rejuvenation.